So Petra, thank you so much for being here today on the Product Moment. It's great to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad I'm here.
Yes. And maybe to start, I would love for you to walk us through your career journey, product journey, starting kind of wherever you want, but what got you to Arta is probably a great place to start.
I started out studying computer science at Stanford. I fell in love with AI and decided to go right into product after I graduated. I think I realized that, things are only good to work on if they're actually valuable to people, and you want to make sure you're focusing on the right problem. And so that kind of high level question of what is valuable, why work on what you're working on, drove me to the world of product. I started out in Google Research because I really wanted to work on an AI driven product. And I got to work on this really cool augmented reality device. And then I wanted to try out the other end of the world. And so I went to Google Payments, which was like the most real world thing I could think of in contrast to augmented reality. And I went to Google Payments. I mostly focused on this big banking app as part of Google Pay and had a great time. I ended up following the SVP Caesar Sengupta over to his new company after he left called Arta Finance. And there we were working on an ML portfolio management system for a digital private family office. And so this was my last about year and a half or so. And we're on the App Store. We have now managing assets, and so it's quite exciting. I kind of have since decided to explore some new opportunities. So I've stepped away and I'm taking a beat to explore and take some time. And that's where we are today.
Amazing, amazing, Petra. I'm super curious, since you're an AI ML nerd and, right now you're exploring the entire universe of applications everywhere right now, I'm sure you have a pretty strong opinion on what do you think is overhyped and underhyped in AI right now?
It's a great question. I feel like it's on the top of everyone's mind right now because of the whole Gen AI wave. I think the go-to response right now is that okay, this wave is actually looking quite real. It's pretty exciting. I think in general there's a couple of different applications of Gen AI. There's one that's on the creative front, very B2C. I think this one has tons of players. You're just seeing this plethora of startups in the market
Yeah.
on these creative fronts. They're really fun. And I think it's a question of like, who's going to succeed there. I think it's likely that most of them won't end up succeeding in the long term, and will end up just, being really fun toys right now or really interesting, but not provide enough value. Um, I think on the other hand, there's some really interesting applications of LLMs in SaaS. And so what you're seeing, I
Interesting.
think, the you see like the summarization, you see models coming in or chatbots coming in the customer service world. And that's where I think there's a lot of very interesting value. So, we've both worked in banking for quite some time and got to experience firsthand how slow and awful these banking systems are currently are. They're built 40 years
It's
ago on,
archaic.
yeah, they're just archaic. The
Yeah.
APIs are so old. Sending
If there
checks,
are APIs.
if there are APIs, and they probably won't be real-time APIs. They're all in batch. There's a lot of spreadsheets that are just downloaded and sent around. It's pretty slow. And so you have a lot of this unstructured data that you have to have real people right now uh, focusing on and kind of sorting through as part of the workflows for these banking
Mm,
systems. And you have instead an LLM like survey a bunch of different apps on a person's device, across, Excel spreadsheets, across old PDF formats, or like really, really old
mm,
banking backend apps, so that you can automate a lot of those processes. There's this huge industry that is still so slow and so inefficient because it's entrenched in this old software, and it's extremely expensive and risky to try to update that software while you have hundreds of millions of dollars running through it. And so I think this is,
Billions, billions per
yeah,
day.
in cases for Google, billions, right? And so
Yeah.
if you, and I think this is similar for other industries like healthcare or insurance, right? You have
Mhm.
these giant industries that are still, came online 30 years ago and haven't changed since. And so um, and they're probably not going to change. They don't have a lot of engineers to do so. So can you instead just like put this clean layer on top that's can just analyze all of their unstructured or semi-structured information and create workflows on top? And I think that's probably the most interesting thing right now.
That's amazing. I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot of value and delight and user experiences. I mean, you saw, in the little product moments, both of us are stable boosted, profile picture, but I'm not entirely sure, how impactful that is for an entire industry whatsoever, or
Mhm.
the way to pay along the way. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Now, taking a step back, with your experience in ML research, banking and payments infrastructure, and now ML infrastructure within fintech, how would you characterize a product role being different across these disciplines?
Totally. Well, it differs quite drastically, and it's pretty interesting how so. So for let's see, for AI, for instance, you have to be it's oftentimes a research world. I'm going to bring over. So it's oftentimes a research world. That means that what you're building might not work. That's one thing. Like you might have an idea for a product and you spend 6 months with a research team trying to build that out, and you actually never end up getting to the product that you really want. And so I think you'd be
Mm,
so mindful of one, um, the staging of your product, like building out multiple versions of progressively more complex MVPs and being
interesting.
comfortable understanding like when to launch each of those. You also have to be open to the opportunities of what research could provide. So there's that other side of it where these researchers could be inventing new technology that could be useful for other applications. So you have to be quite up to date on what those new approaches are and understand how they could be applied potentially to new use cases. So there's kind of that
Mm,
bifocal approach. Oftentimes, it's also quite heavy on data. So you probably have to be comfortable like really diving into the weeds and taking your time to understand the details. Um,
amazing.
on infrastructure, you have to be like the there's going to be tons of APIs, right, or messaging cross-platform, cross apps, like that you're going to have to make sure you know like the back of your hand. In my experience, those roles become more partnership heavy. And so,
Mm,
because then you're working with potentially other partners, other vendors. And so the PM role ends up being also like in part a partnerships role. Um, and then also, if you're working in the world of finance, for instance, there's a huge legal and compliance component. And so a lot of my job has ended up being very weighted on understanding the different legal and compliance structures and how they apply to my product and working very, very closely with the legal and compliance teams. So,
absolutely. I've always thought that you have to be a lawyer to even talk to a lawyer. And the
yeah,
amount of escalations, it's actually really unique. I would say, of course, there's always escalations in a variety of different roles, but within finance, it just seems, regulation updates, banking rails not working, SVB falling apart today, all along the way,
right.
and money and finances being such a core part of the way we live, and it's extraordinarily delicate balance at all
Right. And
times.
it's so high stakes. Like each one of
And
those
it's so high
escalations and
stakes.
bugs could risk hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And so it's it's we're much more cautious in the first
Mhm.
on the first side of like launching anything that could have a bug in it. So like we're
Interesting.
usually focused on implementing safeties and slowly ramping up products just to make sure that
Yeah.
we don't face any of those larger escalations. But of course those happen. And so then you also need to have protocols in place to deal with those safeties when they do, or when those bugs when they do. And so uh, you need to make sure you can resolve them as quickly as possible. We'll see how this current one gets resolved. Hopefully ASAP.
Absolutely. And then I'm kind of curious, how do you recommend other folks becoming a strong ML or AI, PM? What are some things that you've learned over time that are really helpful?
Yeah, so I think the AI PM role is quite underdefined at this point in time and also can differ quite drastically depending on where you're working. There's some places where, or some applications where the AI mechanisms themselves are quite abstracted from the applications. And so you don't actually need to know very much about AI. You really just need to focus on being a good PM and building something that has a lot of value for the user. I think there's other applications that do depend on you going much more into the weeds, and you are going to have to work with the engineers and the researchers to dive into the data and make some of those more nuanced decisions.
Mm,
So in general, I would say like have a good understanding of the type of AI you're working on. You might be working on the Gen AI, you might be working on, computer vision, you might be working on NLP or more like LLMs right now. So I definitely understand like, okay, what's the general model? Like know high level. Also be comfortable with data science and really comfortable
absolutely.
diving into data. Um, and then I think there's, a lot of more particular challenges about working in AI and on AI-based
Mm.
products that you probably have to think about and learn about and be wary of as you dive in. So.
Interesting. On that point, what are some unique challenges that
Mhm.
like AI, ML, et cetera, PMs face?
Yeah, so um, I think there's a couple important ones. One, you have to make sure that what you're working on actually needs AI. I think there's a lot of problems that can just be solved with a rule-based approach or with a heuristic approach. And AI is really interesting and sexy, but it also can be slow to develop. It might be much, much cheaper to just do a rule-based approach if you can get away with it.
Mm,
Um, the second piece is that oftentimes using AI does take some research or take some iterating and doesn't provide perfect results every single time. You're not going to get, 100% effectiveness or reliability. With AI, you might get the AI algorithm to perform as expected 95% of the time,
mm,
and you have to be comfortable knowing what those success metrics are, saying, okay, I want to launch it when it's 95% effective or when it's 90% successful, right? You're using AI in a more nuanced context. So maybe that's language, or maybe that's around computer vision, for instance, or the stock market, like I've worked on
yeah.
previously. And so the decisions you're making or what you're surfacing to users is a complex output. It might be a full sentence, or it might be a
Mm,
picture, or an adjusted picture, or a decision based on that picture. So you won't necessarily get a yes or no from oh, this was obviously a success, this obviously wasn't a success. You might get something of like a sentence that sounds pretty good, but does it
yeah.
sound phenomenal? No. Like, should you cancel
Mm,
the system? Maybe not. Does this count as a bug? Maybe. So I think that's where a PM can come in, because you can really define what that success looks like and how you should alter it, and kind of what problems are the most important for the research team to focus on, now that you understand that model's performance. Also, you have to keep monitoring the performance of your algorithms and of your product once you've launched it. So say you decide that a 95% success rate is good enough with like a 1% error bound on that success rate, then and you've tested your algorithm over and over again, and those are the results you're getting. Even if you deploy it in production, you might see a different performance because that you're seeing new data for the first time that you didn't train on.
yeah.
And so you have to make sure that you don't just set it and forget it. You keep monitoring your system and make adjustments as you go. Um, and that might mean like building in that type of reinforcement data loop to retrain your models on data that you have never seen before that potentially caused an error in production, for instance, um, or or be comfortable like shutting down the system if you think it's really performing not well and it's too high risk to continue when that performance in this current environment is unknown. So there's definitely a few important pieces you need to keep track of.
Amazing, amazing. Now, coming back to the intersection of AI and fintech, what are some of the main bottlenecks for success or development overall within, this intersection?
Totally. So for the past about year and a half, I've worked on the AI applied to trading on the stock market. And
Mm,
here I'd say data by far is the largest bottleneck. And a couple of reasons, like it's a pretty unique application of AI. One, the data is non-stationary. So
yeah.
that means that in classic image classifiers, for instance, if you're trying to identify a dog and a cat, the dog and a cat, there'll always be a dog and a cat there. And the correct answer for is this a dog or is this a cat will always be the same. But for the stock market, financial markets totally fluctuate. The right answer for the last 50 years might not be the right answer tomorrow. For instance, there wasn't a real estate market crash for 50 years, and then all of a sudden there was a real estate market crash. And then I think the last piece is around sanitizing incoming data. I think data in general is usually very messy, and a huge part of the ML engineer's job is to clean and structure that data in some way that they can train on. If you just like eliminate all stocks that fail, you're like, okay, because they end up crashing a year later. So I don't have 10 years of data to train this stock on, so I'm just going to take this data out of my training set. I think that ends up being, sure, your data set's a bit cleaner because now all the stocks have lasted for 10 years and they all line up very
And are
nicely.
quite
But then you also
successful.
and are successful, exactly. So now you eliminate what stocks look like that are going to crash in the future,
Mm,
um, and you'll be training your
fascinating.
data enough.
Interesting, interesting. Not only is it cleaning out potential failure cases, but cleaning out for. I think we also see it with like climate data, for instance, with
Mm.
certain geographics, we don't have enough historical data on a certain region, due to
Oh,
satellite
interesting.
launches along the way, and so there is not only like a smaller data set, mixed in, with other data like variables that have longer data sets or historical data themselves, but also, as you mentioned, you can't clean out failure points because how do you learn from that? That's
Right.
interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious. Let's talk a little bit more about leadership within the PM role. Is consensus always a good thing?
Great question. Great question. I think consensus is usually can be very powerful because it means everyone's bought into the idea. And oftentimes, if you have all of your engineering team and your marketing team, designers, if they're all bought in, that means that everyone's going to really make those micro decisions in a very similar way, probably, and they're all going to be
Mm-hmm.
quite motivated to work in the same direction. Um, the problem is there might be times where it takes a long time to drive everyone to consensus, so it's a bit slower of a process. There's also times where maybe not everyone is going to come to consensus and they just really are still disagreeing no matter how much time you put into it. Ideally there you disagree and commit and you move forward, but I think also sometimes that can be challenging and it won't happen. And so as a PM, if it's not a top down if you don't have top down leadership, you might need to seek that out and kind of try to influence up and influence your managers or maybe the CEO or somewhere higher up in the company to provide that top down leadership to um, to push things forward and come to a decision.
That makes a ton of sense. So
Okay.
this is my favorite question. So Petra, you used to be a competitive volleyball player, and overall, you value yourself as an athlete. What can a product manager learn from a volleyball player?
I do love this question. So I was a setter all growing up, and the setter is, the person who gets that second touch on the ball and tries to give the perfect pass to the hitter or like set the hitter, so that they will like basically get a point and
Here's the
hit the ball really
spike,
hard.
the spike
Yeah, hit the ball
person.
really hard onto the
Yeah,
other side of the net and make a kill is what we call it, and get a point for the team. And so oftentimes, like as a setter, you're not really the one scoring the point ever. Really, like you're trying to make a call on the strategy in, uh, during the play to figure out who to set, which hitter to set, that's most likely to get the kill. And I think this is very similar to being a PM in a lot of ways. Uh, the engineers, I'd say, are oftentimes the hitters, where they're really building the final product. And I find that being a PM, oftentimes you're really trying to set up the shots, and like people look to you as a team captain or as a setter to keep the momentum going, to acknowledge the loss and learn from it and move on as quickly and get yourself back on the court and go hard another time. And to like just like help people, every single person play to the best of their abilities. Like I think that's the biggest job of a setter, is like really make everyone shine and celebrate their wins and be there for them on their losses and in the hard times. And I think that's just really helped me as a PM. And yeah, it has a lot of parallels.
wow, that was beautifully said. I love how a setter is pretty much a PM. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, Petra, this was absolutely amazing, to have you here on the product moment. Thank you so much for coming and joining. And yeah, thank you. This was an absolute blast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is also super fun. I'm excited to chat again soon.
Yay, great. Well, thank you.
All right, see you soon.